The biting wind howls through the desolate peaks, carrying with it a faint, unsettling echo. A splintered wooden sign, half buried in snow, points towards a forgotten path. The air grows heavy, thick with an unseen presence, as a distant, mournful wail rises from the valley below. Is it just the wind playing tricks, or is something truly weeping in the heart of this haunted mountain? Welcome back to Room Beneath. Tonight, we delve into a chilling tale of college friends and a mountain trek that went terribly wrong. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. Prepare yourselves, because some legends are best left undisturbed. "All right, guys, this is it," Tony exclaimed, pumping his fist as they stood at the trailhead. Crisp mountain air invigorating their lungs. 3 days of pure freedom, no lectures, no deadlines, just us and the wilderness. Peter adjusted his camera, already scouting for scenic shots, while Julie hummed excitedly, pulling out a map. This wasn't just any mountain. Local legends whispered of forgotten spirits and strange happenings, adding a thrilling edge to their adventure. They pushed deeper into the woods, the main path fading behind them, opting for a barely visible deer trail Tony insisted would lead to a secret, amazing view. "All right, guys."
The secret path grew narrower, branches scraping against their jackets, and the playful chatter began to subside. The forest deepened, shadows lengthening even in the midday sun. A stillness settled, broken only by their own footsteps and the distant rustle of unseen creatures. Suddenly, Peter pointed. "Look, an old cabin!" Tucked away in a clearing was a dilapidated wooden shack, its windows shattered, paint peeling like old skin. A sense of unease settled over them, replacing their earlier excitement. Near the cabin, partially hidden by tangled vines, was a stone structure. "Is that a well?" Julie whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. They moved closer, revealing a circular stone structure overgrown with moss and ivy, a heavy, rusted iron grate covering its opening. It looked ancient, forgotten, like a relic from another time. As Tony reached out to touch the cold, damp stone, a sound broke the silence. Faint at first, a low, guttural moan, rising and falling with an unnatural cadence. It was distant, yet it seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet, chilling them to the bone. The sound grew louder, no longer a moan, but something distinctly human. A deep, sorrowful sob, followed by a raw, heart-wrenching wail that echoed through the dense woods. Julie clutched Tony's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Peter's camera dropped slightly, his usual composure shattered. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. It was undeniably a cry, a lament rising from the depths of the ancient well. It sounded like pure anguish, like something trapped and in immense pain, begging for release. The crying intensified, filling the air, and for a horrifying moment, they felt as if the sound wasn't just coming from the well, but from everywhere around them. The wailing from the well reached a crescendo, a sound so utterly despairing it felt physical, pressing against their chests, stealing their breath.
Julie's grip on Tony's arm tightened to a painful vice. "We have to go, Tony, please," she choked out, tears welling in her eyes. Peter, usually composed, stood frozen, his camera dangling forgotten, his face pale as ash. Tony, though his heart hammered like a drum against his ribs, forced himself to speak. Okay, let's just back away slowly. Don't run, don't make any sudden moves." The sound, however, seemed to follow their every thought, a mournful echo in the very air. Every instinct screamed at them to flee, to put as much distance between themselves and that weeping abyss as possible. Tony led the way, pushing through the tangled undergrowth, his practicality warring with the primal fear that clawed at his throat. Peter stumbled behind, his eyes darting, constantly scanning the deepening shadows as if expecting something to emerge. Julie whimpered softly, her head down, just trying to keep pace. But the forest, which had seemed so inviting hours ago, now felt oppressive, its towering trees like silent, watchful sentinels. The path they'd taken seemed to vanish, replaced by an endless labyrinth of identical trees. Panic began to set in as Tony pulled out his map, only to find the familiar trails replaced by an endless swirling green. His compass needle spun wildly, refusing to settle, as if caught in some unseen magnetic field. "It's no use," he muttered, his voice strained. "We're completely off the grid." The air grew colder, and a damp, earthy smell permeated everything. Julie, her face streaked with tears and dirt, huddled closer to Peter, who, despite his own fear, tried to offer a comforting arm. The mournful cry, though distant now, felt like an omnipresent hum, a silent promise that they hadn't truly escaped. Just as hope began to fray, a chilling whisper slithered through the trees, not quite words, but a breathy, ancient sound that seemed to curl around their ears. It was everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied voice weaving through the rustling leaves. Suddenly, a small, intricate wooden carving, resembling a twisted, screaming face, dropped from an unseen branch directly in front of Tony, landing with a soft thud. It wasn't there a moment ago. Their eyes locked on the unsettling object, then darted to the dark canopy above. The whisper intensified, transforming into a low, menacing chuckle that seemed to mock their very existence. They weren't alone. The small, twisted wooden carving, a grotesque mask of agony, lay on the damp earth between them. The menacing chuckle, though fading, left a lingering chill that seeped into their very bones. Tony, brave and practical, bent down to pick it up, his fingers brushing against the cold, carved wood. It felt ancient, imbued with a malevolent energy. Julie recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream, while Peter, though visibly shaken, raised his camera, trying to snap a photo, but the lens seemed to cloud, refusing to focus. This wasn't just a lost item. It was a message, a dark greeting from an unseen entity that now stalked them. "We can't stay here," Tony whispered, the carving clutched in his hand, its presence a burning weight. He tried to reorient himself, but every tree looked the same. Every path led deeper into the bewildering wilderness. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them, branches reaching like skeletal fingers, shadows dancing with ill intent. Julie started to sob openly, her earlier enthusiasm completely shattered, replaced by raw, guttural fear. Peter, usually quiet and observant, grew increasingly agitated, his eyes darting frantically, convinced he saw movement at the edge of their vision, fleeting glimpses of something dark lurking just beyond their perception.
Hours blurred into an endless cycle of walking, hoping, and despair. Just as the last vestiges of daylight began to bleed from the sky, painting the western horizon in streaks of bruised purple and orange, they stumbled into a small, unnaturally quiet clearing. A strange sense of calm settled over the space, a temporary reprieve from the forest's relentless hostility. For a brief, terrifying moment, they almost convinced themselves they were safe. Then Peter noticed it. A small pile of freshly disturbed earth, not quite a grave, but something intentionally dug. And perched on a gnarled root beside it, another wooden carving, identical to the one Tony still clutched. The second carving shattered their fragile illusion of safety. They weren't just lost, they were being led, hunted. A low, guttural growl, too close, too real, ripped through the fading twilight, snapping their heads towards the disturbed earth. From the shallow mound, a pale, emaciated hand, fingers long and skeletal, slowly began to push through the soil, dirt clinging to its rotting flesh. A silent, agonizing scream tore through Julie's throat, while Tony instinctively raised the headlamp, its beam cutting through the deepening gloom, illuminating the horror unfolding before them. They were not alone, and whatever was buried beneath their feet was now clawing its way back to the surface. The pale, emaciated hand, pushing through the soil, was joined by another, then a skeletal forearm, slowly, agonizingly pulling itself free. Dirt rained down around it as a gaunt, hollow-eyed face, matted with mud and decay, began to emerge from the shallow grave. A silent, gut-wrenching scream tore from Julie's throat, her knees giving out as Tony's headlamp beam caught the entity's vacant, dark eyes. It was a woman, or what was left of one, her mouth agape in a silent, eternal scream, her rotting clothes clinging to her cadaverous frame. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of damp earth and something far more ancient and foul. The figure was slowly, deliberately pulling itself out, its movements stiff and unnatural, as if fighting against the earth itself. The mournful wail cry, which had been a distant echo, suddenly surged, reverberating through the clearing, a chilling duet with the silent horror unfolding before them. Tony, recovering from his initial shock, grabbed Julie's arm, pulling her to her feet. "Run, now!" he yelled, his voice hoarse with terror. They scrambled, tripping over roots and rocks, desperate to escape the rising specter. But as they burst out of the clearing, the forest seemed to twist, morphing into an impenetrable wall of thorns and impossibly thick branches, blocking their path as if guided by an unseen will. Trapped, they could hear the dragging, shuffling steps behind them, the soft, wet sound of decaying flesh against damp earth. The scent of putrefaction grew stronger, suffocating. Tony, thinking quickly, spotted a hollowed-out fallen log, partially hidden by thick ferns. "In here, quickly!" he urged, pushing Julie and Peter ahead of him. They squeezed into the cramped, decaying space, the air thick with the smell of mold and fear. Outside, the shuffling steps paused, unervingly close. A low, raspy moan, like dry leaves scraping together, emanated from just beyond their flimsy refuge. They held their breath, every muscle tense, praying the darkness within the log would hide them. Silence. A terrifying, oppressive silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, a single, skeletal finger, encrusted with dried mud, slowly, deliberately scraped against the rough bark of the log, just inches from Peter's face. The sound was like a nail on a chalkboard, amplified by their panicked minds. The air inside grew impossibly colder, and a faint, sweet, cloying smell, like stagnant water and rotting flowers, filled their nostrils. A whispered voice, raw and ragged, not quite words, but a guttural plea, slithered through the cracks in the log. It spoke of betrayal, of a life stolen, and a longing for what was lost. The voice seemed to be coming from directly above them, and then a single, dark, watery eye peered into a small knothole, staring directly at them, unblinking, full of ancient malice and despair. The single, dark, watery eye, an abyss of ancient malice and despair, stared unblinking into the knothole. The raw, ragged whispers of betrayal and stolen life intensified, pressing against their ears, filling the cramped log with a suffocating dread. Then, with a sickening crack, the log shuddered. A skeletal hand, fingers gnarled and powerful, began to tear at the rotten wood just above Peter's head. Splinters rained down, and the smell of putrefaction became overwhelming, mingling with that cloying sweetness. They were trapped, and whatever was outside was no longer content to merely observe. With a desperate cry, Tony kicked at the other end of the log, dislodging rotten pieces, creating a small, frantic exit. They scrambled out, bursting back into the cold, damp clearing, gasping for breath. The skeletal entity stood there, fully formed now, a gaunt woman in tattered, mud-stained clothes, her head tilted unnaturally, her dark eyes fixed on them. The mournful wail cry was no longer distant. It echoed from her throat, a guttural, eternal lament. She didn't run, she glided, her movements fluid and impossibly fast, a predatory specter closing the distance, her emaciated hands reaching out, fingers grasping at the empty air. They ran blindly, the mournful cry of the well woman a constant, chilling accompaniment to their pounding hearts. The forest, once their adventure playground, had become a living cage, its branches grasping, roots tripping them. They stumbled upon a small, crumbling stone structure, partially obscured by thick ivy. An ancient shrine, perhaps, its altar adorned with more of the twisted wooden carvings. Desperate, Julie pointed to a narrow crack in the stone, a dark fissure leading into the earth. It was a gamble, a desperate plea for escape, but the well woman was closing in, her silent, gliding pursuit relentless, her cries now a cacophony of agony and rage. Without hesitation, they squeezed through the narrow opening, tumbling into a suffocating darkness that reeked of damp earth and something anciently cold.
The passage sloped downwards, barely wide enough for one, leading them deeper into the mountain's unseen depths. Above them, the mournful cry of the well-woman reached an ear-splitting crescendo, vibrating through the rock, threatening to shatter their very bones. Then, silence. A profound, absolute silence that was even more terrifying than the screams. Ahead, a faint, eerie light began to pulse, a soft, unnatural blue glow illuminating a cavernous space, and within it, rising from a pool of still black water, was the mouth of the ancient well, its rusted grate now wide open, beckoning them into its ultimate embrace. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, remember to like this video, subscribe to Room Beneath, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next stories.